So we're back by popular demand, which what does that mean? Like you've been on what three? This will be the third time, but I was talking to you and people are like, "Why don't you do more of these? We want to see these." So I thought this will be the last one of the year. You were the first guest on. You should be the last guest on, but we got something pretty cool to talk about today, and that's why I wanted to ask you to come on. I won't bore everybody with the details and say how you're doing since we talk almost every day. But something super cool that just came out, I wanted you to talk about and kind of why and what brought this project on. But if for those of you who don't know who I'm talking, by the way, this is Reuven Leeroff, the author of The Aikido Student Manual, a traditional guide to martial arts. Did I get that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's
okay.
Specifically for a new generation of
Right.
Of Aikido student, but I mean, hopefully everybody finds some value in some of the ideas.
Yeah, great stuff. And tell me first, when did this project pop in your head to say I want to write a book, a martial arts book, and a lot of it is obviously Aikido?
Yeah. So I first thought of the idea, and probably 6 years ago, I was first starting the dojo up with my wife, and it was really just us training together. But as we started bringing new students on, I had to start systematizing how we were doing this in a way that helped new students feel welcomed and gave them useful information, and at the same time helped with retention, made them feel like they should stick around. And at first I was giving out a different book, and I had gotten that idea originally from my first Aikido teacher, from Stigl Sensei, because that's how he did it, right? And I always, jokingly say, but it's not far from the truth, that like 99% of what I do is what I learned from him. And he built this huge dojo. So, success leaves clues, and I try not to ignore them. But then I realized that, a book like this could be a really great tool for my students, but there are some ideas in there that that I had sort of realized for younger students that weren't being touched on, and I wanted to discuss those. I wanted to give my students my impressions of what they should expect, especially at the beginning of their training. And at the same time show them sort of the world that they were opening into in the USAF, in the world of Aikido out there, different organizations, all that good stuff. Which is why it was so great to have you and Peter Burnett Sensei write, in your case the foreword, in his case the introduction. So I mean, sort of first and foremost, thank you for doing that. I think that that's an incredible value to especially my new students, to be able to see that there's this great big wide world of Aikido out there.
Well, it was my pleasure, and actually I was honored that you asked me to do it, and it was fun. And I think I may have remarked this to some people, but it was a fun exercise to think about our relationship a little bit, because it's a big ask, it's time. I had to, have editors look at it. I'm not a writer. I don't have a degree in psychology or a higher education. So it was like, how do I offer a little bit of input on my experience in the Aikido world, but at the same time, let the audience know the value of our relationship, how we formed a friendship, and talk about some of those things in there. So that's what I was trying to accomplish in that, and I hope it comes across. But back to you, the star, the author. So what was the hardest part of the book, of putting the book together?
It's so interesting, because the easiest part of the book for me to write was, the part that had to do with O Sensei's life, because it's, pretty much well documented. So it was just my sort of abridging of that story. It was actually a pretty simple thing to do, is to say, here's sort of the founder's origin story, for lack of a better phrase. The hardest thing for me probably to write was anything to do with teaching, anything to do with being a good instructor, because I, up until 6 years ago, I really, even a year into opening the dojo, I hadn't thought about this. I was still very much in the mind of like 100% a practitioner. I wasn't thinking of myself as a teacher. I wasn't looking to establish myself that way yet. And so that transition was incredibly challenging for me. And I was really grateful for having Stigl Sensei as long as I did, to give me a lot of that sort of guidance and expectation management and all that good stuff. But I mean, it's an incredible challenge to, if you spent so much of your life, for me, since the earliest memories I have are of training. So, the idea of teaching really never really entered my mind. Like in judo, I had covered a class here or there, but it wasn't like a normal thing for me to teach. And same thing in Aikido, it was not a normal thing for me to do. But I think that was the most challenging thing, and doing it in a way that, if my seniors read it, they don't think, man, what is this guy doing? He has no idea, and so some of that had to do with, thinking about the feedback I've gotten from, people like you who are my seniors who have been teaching a very long time, and making sure that I always took that into account when I was writing.
Yeah, kudos, because I can't even imagine the work that you put into this behind the scenes, for years now, to finally get it to the point where it's published and it's out there. And I've held the book, I've seen it, and it's cool. And I think what's interesting too is, like, you're naturally a good teacher, even though you haven't been teaching maybe as long as others. Like, it's very interesting to me. I think what people will find in the book, if I could just give some secrets away, is that, you're obviously a very good practitioner. Anybody that's ever trained with you knows this. You have a lifetime of martial arts and mixed background, but your Aikido is very special. I think it's very strong. I like it. I like training with you. Hence the reason I invited you to come teach at my dojo, because I want my students to feel and see your Aikido. But you have a dojo, you're growing it. We share a lot of ideas. You got great momentum. You're a great practitioner, but you're also like the next generation teacher, if you will, because we're a little bit different age. I think we have 15 years between us or so. But so what I want people to see in the book, I think they'll read, is that, yeah, he can do it. He can talk about it. He shows up, but this is a deeper dive into your mind of what you're ultimately trying to do 10, 20, 30, and 50 years from now. That's how I see the book. So let's get into, you covered the easiest part. The hardest part was talking about teaching. What was the most fun part of the book for you? Like, now that it's out there, what's the most fun?
Oh man. Probably, anything to do with the things that support your Aikido training. So I would actually say it was probably the most fun, and also a little bit the thing I was the most apprehensive about was writing about, as a practitioner of traditional martial arts, the idea, sort of softly bringing up the point that you can't lean on your Aikido training, or really any traditional martial arts training, as your sole form of physical discipline. The idea that you have to take care of your body beyond the practice of your martial art. And the reality is that, I mean, the lack of that exists in every martial art, right? I mean, you see that in judo, you see that, you see that in competitive martial arts, as, not just in arts like Aikido where there's no competition, but, the first person who inspired me there was a judo teacher, was Yonezuka Sensei, who passed away around the same time as Stigl Sensei. This guy into his 70s had a 6-pack, right? And, one of the things I mentioned in the book is nobody expects everyone to have that, right? I don't think that's a realistic expectation. But the idea that you never let go of maintaining your physical body ensures that you never get to the point in your life where you hear, and I'm sure we've both heard this at one time or another, you hear this statement from someone who says, oh, I'm older, so I'm a little bit broken. I can't, let me throw you, but don't throw me, right? The idea that there's ever a point in your life where you won't be able to take ukemi, at all, right? The idea that, you're going to literally just let yourself waste away and just lean on the practice of your martial art as the sole physical activity of your life is really sad. It's one of those sort of sad things that you hope never happens to someone.
You bring up a really good point, because if you look back at our seniors, 7th dans that have been practicing 40, 50 years, I think, the old school mentality of just go hard, as hard as you can when you're younger. And again,
Yep.
we can agree that Ukimi has developed in how you meet the mat to be a little safer, a little
Of course.
softer over time. But I think the commonality is that those guys back then and women, they trained super hard.
Mhm.
But forget Aikido martial arts back then, but was health, general health, body calisthenics, nutrition, was that a focus in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as much as it is today? So I think that
True.
bridge that you're forming now is, look, if you want to do any kind of martial art, especially Aikido, you have to pay attention to what you're doing off the mat from a nutrition standpoint, as well as a basic exercise. And I know you do a lot of cardio through Peloton, but you also do a lot of strength training like I do. So you have a nice complement to your Aikido training, which I think is a non-guaranteed insurance plan that you can train longer than others. And I think that's what you're touching on, is it?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that struck me the most was, when you're competing at a national level in judo, for example, there's an entire group of people around you supporting your competitive experience, right? So you've got your sensei, who is generally also your coach. You've got, in some cases, you've got physical therapists who are like exercise scientists who are, working with you or working with the team as a group or whatever. But there's this idea that you do, maybe 2-3 hours a day of judo if you're in heavy competition mode, but you're also doing an hour or two a day of physical training, right? For example, you don't see football players, just play football all the time as a way to stay in shape and get ready for a game. They're doing sprints. They're doing, all kinds of drills. They're doing weightlifting. They're taking care of their bodies as well. They've got rest days. They've got meal plans that are specific to them. And I think, one of the things that I noticed the most, to your point, when Stigl Sensei was telling me about his experience, he was a track runner. He was on a scholarship at NYU back in the day for running. And one of the things that I noticed was he pushed his body, like you said, to the absolute limit, both in that regard and when he obviously moved into Aikido. He had that mentality that allowed you to do that, right? But at the same time, as much as I love him, the idea that he would, as an Uchideshi, he would give me $20, send me out to get him food, and I would always be sent to like Wendy's or something like that, as opposed to getting a solid meal. And I think you're right. A lot of that had to do with, back then, there wasn't a lot of science around this, and there wasn't a huge movement around the idea that you have to take care of your body. You just thought, food was food. However you got it into your body, if you were hungry, you ate, and that was the end of it. Just, and yeah. I think there's a lot more information today than there was back then that supports the idea that if you eat right, if you move right, within the ability of your body, you're at least giving yourself the best chance to get as much out of your body as you can. And that's true at any age. I have a student who's 68, same thing. He came in, bad back, bad everything, started exercising in addition to his Aikido. And now he's rowing miles on a rower, right, with little to no issue at 68 years old. So there's no bad time or wrong time to start taking care of your body.
Yeah, great point too. And I think if you're looking at your typical audience on this book, it's maybe not the pioneers that spent 7 days a week training and were Uchideshi for Yamada Sensei, but it's the average family guy or mom or teenager looking to get into martial arts, and
right.
And the emphasis is train, you'll learn, you'll learn community, you'll learn some cool self-defense, you'll learn a great art, you'll be part of this community, but at the same time, take care of yourself off the mat, because then you can go longer. You can train longer, faster, harder, right? I love it. Big part of that. So what was the, I asked you what was the most difficult part. This is a similar question, but what was the most stressful part maybe behind the scenes in putting this book together that you can recall?
I think, I don't know that I would call it stress, but I think the thing that, I thought about the most, and in fact engaged you with on the most, was the glossary, were the words at the end of the book that we collected. Because, you know, in my case, one of the things that works against me is the fact that I've got this sort of varied background in martial arts. And in judo, you know, there are different names for things and different reho, different etiquette, different ways of showing respect and different terms that are used and all this other stuff. And so the immense, I don't know, immense, but the making sure that the words that were used, you know, hit as many of the things that are shared amongst dojos as possible was important to me, because there's always going to be variation between dojos, sure, even within Aikido, even within the federation. So, you know, I think in that regard, it was the thing that I thought about the most in terms of getting your feedback. So thank you for that, by the way. But, absolutely, you know, making sure that that was done in a way that was helpful and shareable, I think was the thing I thought about the most. Yeah.
I think you did an excellent job with that, especially getting to the final version or final cut, because even in the book, I know you mentioned this a lot. These are obviously your beliefs, your opinions, you're the author, but you're sharing experience, a depth of experience, even at a young age. You've probably done more in martial arts than a lot of people twice your age, to be honest. But you're also very careful to say, look, there's variance in things. It's not a book about technique. It's not, right, you know, it's a book about lifestyle. It's a book about, you know, the power and the positivity of Aikido training for the most part. And then it's a guide, like you said. It's even though it's manual, it truly is a Sherpa or a guide to somebody that can't really see past the hand in front of them, what they can expect when they find the right dojo. Let's talk about that for a second, because that just popped in my head. You could almost look at the book and say that it's like a, you know, you go to Barnes and Noble and like, it could be titled How to Pick a Dojo, How to Pick a Teacher. Like, talk about some of the things that you touch on there that maybe is pretty common things that occur out there in the community when people pop into a school and they see, you know, the teacher, for example.
Yeah, that's a big one. You know, the thing that spurred the teacher side of that, you know, walking into a dojo, Stickle Sensei used to talk about this idea that, you know, when you walk into a dojo, an Aikido dojo specifically, but if you walk into an Aikido dojo, it should feel like you just walked into a little slice of Japan. I mean, verbatim, he said, slice of Japan. That idea that when you walked in, there should be this feeling that you get that just settles you, right? You feel like, wow, this is a place, right? This is a location, a special thing. And, you know, something that like Chiba Sensei used to talk about that too. The idea that a dojo is not just a gym. It's not just a fitness center. It's a spiritual thing. You know, to the extent that I understand spirituality, there is a palpable thing there, right? I mean, you know, the perfect example of a dojo like that, and, you know, is I don't know if you've been there yet. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Jim Staviero Sensei's dojo in Red Bank in New Jersey. I mean, this place, and he's lucky. You know, he has a senior student, Lee, who's a wood turner, and literally did almost all the woodwork in this dojo by hand. I mean, everything is just gorgeous. You walk in there and it feels like you're in Japan. So there's an aspect of that. There's an aspect of cleanliness that should go into it, right? The Stickle Sensei used to talk about sight lines, making sure that, you know, from wherever you're standing in the dojo, you shouldn't see clutter. You know, if you have a children's program, the bathrooms, number one priority. You have to have immaculate bathrooms. If your bathrooms aren't clean, parents will not let their children train there, no matter how good the teaching is or how good the location is. But the thing with teaching, you know, my experience, and this is sort of a delicate thing, but when I was transitioning from judo to Aikido, I went around and looked at different dojos, and I mean, every time I walked into a school, I would see this sort of overweight, sickly kind of looking chief instructor. And the thing that struck me about that, you know, wasn't the judgment of this person is out of shape, you know, because they might be on a journey of trying to get in shape. So who am I to judge that, right? I don't know what their situation is. But the thing that struck me is that they positioned themselves as the role model, as the the thing to aim for. To me, if you're going to position yourself as a role model, if you're going to position yourself as a canvas, or not as a canvas, as a model for someone to work towards, then I think the onus is on you as the teacher, as the owner, to work harder than any one of your students to do that, to be that role model. If you've got students working harder than you on their fitness, on their diet, on their overall health, not to mention their Aikido, then what kind of teacher are you? I think it's an important question to ask yourself. What kind of teacher are you really being if you have students who are putting in more effort than you?
Great point. Yeah. I mean, eye-opening point. And it's a tough truth for some to handle that and to see it. Sure. Hopefully they can use, this as a catalyst. I know if your book had come out 7-8 years ago, I would be, reading it, looking at myself in the mirror in that regard too, to improve myself. But
yeah, but I mean, you're a perfect example of someone who did that sort of, on your own. Like, and sometimes it's a really hard thing to, there's a huge amount of credit that you're due for that, because I think that that's an incredibly difficult thing for someone to do on their own, to recognize, that they're at a point where the reality of their position doesn't match the reality of their condition, right? So they're in this position where they're supposed to be looked up to, or at least modeled after, and by people who don't know. And the example that's being set isn't the one that's going to lead to building a community of healthy people, of hard practitioners, male or female, or anything in between. The idea that you have to take care of your body, I think, is a universal concept, but it's incredibly challenging, and it's something you fall in and out of over time.
Yeah, great point. I mean, for me, it was like I'm looking in the mirror, and it wasn't like I'm a dojo cho or I have a school. It was like I'm a black belt and I don't look the part. Fourth dan at the time, I think. So like, yeah, totally. No, Absolutely. That's excellent. I love that part of the book. And I hope it really resonates with people in a positive way, which I think it will. Let's wrap up with just final thoughts. Like, what do you hope to have happen with, or what's a message you can share with people that are on the fence about the book, about buying it, or any words you can share that aren't in the book to maybe, get them to take a look at it? Cause I think it's a very, very good read.
Well, I think the big thing is communication. I always say this, at the end of everything that I write or say, really, is, if you find something useful, then please take it, use it, restructure it, and give it to someone else however you want. The most important thing for me is that someone feels it. I don't care if, I get credit for really anything, as long as the impact happens, right? But on the flip side, if you find you're reading something of mine and you go, man, this guy is out of his mind, he doesn't know what he's talking about, then by all means, throw it out and don't, and by the way, that itself is not a self created thing. That actually is something that I gleaned from Nishio Sensei. He used to say that at the beginning of each one of his video tutorials, right? He always used to say, like, hey, I'm going to go over this today, this bridge technique or whatever I'm doing. And, if you find something you like, take it. If you don't, discard it. And the other thing is communication. If you're finding yourself thinking, do I want to buy this guy's book or not? I have questions, or I have concerns, I have criticisms, I have whatever those things are, whatever those feelings are. I always try to make it clear that people should message me directly, whether it's a phone call or a text or an email or a message. Just the big thing is I want to make sure that our Aikido community increases the level of communication between us, not decrease and silo ourselves into these little pockets of people who, only talk when they agree on things. I very much invite the idea that somebody messages me and says, hey, I think your idea is totally whacked out of your mind, and here's why. And and they're ready for me to come back and say, hey, I hear you. Let's chat about it. Let's talk about, maybe where I'm wrong and how I can make change. Because again, the big thing for me is, teach once, train twice, right? So if you're spending more time teaching than you are training, I think that's a broken relationship that you have with your growth. But if you're training more often than you're teaching, then I think that there's an opportunity, to teach better.
If somebody wants to pick up a copy, what's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, so obviously they're on Amazon. So just search Aikido Student Manual, and it'll pop up. And it's on paperback and Kindle. And of course, we have copies at our dojo as well. And all of our new students get them when they sign up. So yeah, Amazon around the world too. So you can get them, France, Germany, Japan, wherever.